Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 23rd of April, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar continuing its rise from the end of last week. So we are seeing the dollar strengthening. Interestingly, just a slight recovery here in the dollar. So that is interesting that we may be just forming a bottom here, but it's too early to say, of course. The trends are still bearish in the medium and long term. We do have these downside targets, but we are seeing upside targets now emerging on the short term chart. So dollar strength short term. And that translates to euro dollar weakness. So the euro weaker against the dollar. And so, having had this high in January, February time, we're now just seeing that coming off the top a little bit, and we do have some downside targets here, back to the 120 area. Japanese yen is where we really see the dollar strength showing up, and I always look at dollar yen because it shows up the dollar strength earlier generally, and here we see the last 4 or 5 days we've been rising on the dollar. Sterling consequently is falling. So sterling just nudging the 140 level, fell away last week on the Bank of England's comments on interest rate rises. Now not priced in that we might see a rise in May. So on interest rates. So sterling just coming back a little bit. So short term bearish, medium and long term still bullish against the dollar. Against the euro, not looking as strong. We're still long term bearish. Medium term, we are bullish, but short term, again, we're bearish, and we've got downside targets there too. Looking against the Swiss franc, we see here just bearish below the cloud, and against the Australian dollar, also just bearish, but recovering a little bit this morning. So we are just seeing that slight improvement. Bitcoin is up this morning, nudging $9,000 again, and that's a pretty critical level for Bitcoin. We've had quite a strong week, coming up from 8,000 to 9,000. We do have an upside target to 9,035. We're not far from that now, about another $100 on the Bitcoin price. This will give us a new thrust upside target. So Bitcoin is looking better, and it may well be that we're seeing a recovery. Long term, of course, the lagging line is still above the cloud. Medium term, we're bearish, but not much work to do to turn bullish. So Bitcoin could be back. Looking at the US markets, they were down on Friday, so that was really just unwound the gains that we saw earlier in the week. Still bearish on the medium-term charts, and we do have downside targets not activated on the S&P, but we are seeing on the Nasdaq 100 we do have a mix of targets, and Nasdaq is still looking precarious to say the least. We haven't yet broken back down below the short-term cloud, but it does look like the Nasdaq is running out of steam. And we look at the Dow Jones index. Again, we've got downside targets on the Dow. Here we've got downside targets of about 14%, and we are still bearish below the cloud. So the big cap stocks in the US are really leading the market lower. And if we look at the Russell 2000, this shows up the broad-based 2000 US stocks not looking as bearish. So it's not yet showing up across the board. The futures have barely changed this morning. The S&P is slightly up. The Nasdaq E-mini is up about 1/4%. So we are seeing potential for the futures to open higher, but the charts here are bearish on the short-term chart. FTSE 100 is up very, very slightly this morning, and the FTSE 250 also just starting to come back through the cloud on the medium term, looking better than the 100. And the DAX also just flat at the moment, down slightly this morning, and the CAC 40 also just fairly flat, down about the same, about 1/3%. Japan was barely changed overnight, so fairly flat performance there. Still looking bearish on the short-term chart. The medium-term chart, sorry, the short-term is looking a bit better. Hang Seng was off over 0.5%, so it's still looking a bit worrying on that medium-term chart. And China did recover somewhat last week, but again, we're just testing new lows here, so still not looking great there. The Indian market, the Sensex was up. That is one of the better looking Asian markets, and the Australian market also up slightly as well. Brent crude is down a little bit this morning, but very small amount, and we are just sitting near the $74 level. We see the last couple of weeks how crude oil has really hit those higher levels. and Trump was tweeting at the end of last week on OPEC, and that did push the price a little bit higher. But we are just seeing here that we are breaking out in that medium and long-term view. We've got upside targets, so we're still pretty bullish for Brent. WTI, much the same picture. US nat gas sitting at $2.74. A bit of a recovery on Friday, but still has work to do. Looking at gold, many of you know I'm quite a serious gold watcher. Gold falling at the end of the week last week, so we are just seeing gold lower. We've got a downside target to 1285, which is activated on the short-term chart, but a really mixed picture here. And of course, we've got 1257 as low as 1257 on the medium-term chart. But interestingly, we still do have all these upside targets, most of which are activated. So gold is just pulling back. We see it on the medium and the long-term chart. It's really nothing major to worry about. We could pull all the way back to around 1300, and we'd still be in an uptrend on the long-term chart. But watch for a recovery, and the 1 minute chart is quite often a good place to do that. We had 1330 as the target. That's where we're given. That was given at 1346. Wait for new upside targets here, but the trend in the very, very short term is still down. Silver also looking a little bit vulnerable, but holding a better position than gold. US 10-year yields up very sharply at the last few days, and we're really nudging this 3% level now. So this is really the big story: is bond yields are going much higher in the US, nudging that level for the first time in a very long time. Taking a look at German bonds, they're collapsing. Remember, this is the price, not the yield. So we're seeing real turmoil starting to develop in the bond market. Bitcoin is, Apple is lower and looking really very vulnerable after Friday's move, and down some 4% on Friday. So Apple is really running out of steam. Amazon also just now starting to run out of steam as well. Still looking bullish though on the short and medium and long term time frames, not looking anywhere near as bad as Apple, but Apple is the worry, and we've been saying that all of last week. Google not looking as strong on the medium term chart. Facebook down slightly last week in the mid 160s, just very flat in this area now. And Microsoft is really probably one of the better performers, although it was down 1% on Friday. So we are seeing the market being dragged down quite heavily, probably by Apple. So that's something to keep an eye out this week. Just watch for what's happening with Apple shares. We see here we've got this big collapse in the price. We've got a potential downside target of 15% lower if we go below that sort of 160 level. So just keep an eye on the chart, and you can see here again another 14% downside target if we go lower there as well. So Apple is the thing to watch this week. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.